Hey guys, tonight we're diving nose first into the wonderfully pungent world of medieval hygiene. You ever walk into a gym locker room, take one breath and think, yup, my soul just left my body? Now imagine that. Everywhere. All the time. Welcome to the Middle Ages, where soap was suspicious, baths were rare, and smelling like a barnyard was just everyday life. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and what time you're watching this in the comments. I love seeing how far and wide this sleepy little history circle reaches. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the muddy streets of a medieval town, and there's a sour-sweet stink clinging to everything. Smoke, sweat, unwashed linen, livestock, and something suspiciously human. You're dressed in a wool tunic that hasn't seen soap in months, and you're pretty sure your boots have actual mushrooms growing inside. The guy next to you? He hasn't bathed since Michaelmas, and that was Three Saints' feast days ago. But this wasn't considered gross. Back then, bathing wasn't part of daily life. In fact, it was borderline suspicious. The medieval church, especially around the 12th century, started spreading the idea that exposing the body too often, especially naked, could lead to immoral thoughts or even invite the devil in. So you didn't just avoid baths to save water, you avoided them to save your soul. Public bathhouses did exist in earlier centuries, especially in places like Islamic Spain or Byzantium, where hygiene was more advanced. But as plague fears grew in Western Europe, people began blaming water for illness. There was this widespread idea that washing opened your pores and allowed bad air to enter your body, what they called miasma. So many people, including the wealthy, reduced bathing to just a few times a year, often coinciding with major religious holidays. If you were lucky, you got a birthday bath. If not, well, happy Stenchiversary. Clothes weren't washed much either. Wool was hard to clean, and linen undergarments, if you had them, were sometimes rinsed, but rarely scrubbed. Instead, people relied on layering and perfume. A noblewoman might dab lavender on her sleeves or carry a pomander, a little scented ball filled with cloves or dried flowers, to sniff whenever the environment got overwhelming, which was constantly. And yet this all felt normal to them. Historians still argue whether medieval folks were completely oblivious to their own odors or just didn't care. Some scholars suggest they were very aware but accepted it as the status quo. After all, if your neighbor smells like pickled goat sweat and you do too, who's judging? Here's a quirky tidbit. Charlemagne, emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, supposedly demanded his clothes be boiled regularly and bathed often. By medieval standards, he was basically Mr. Clean. But even he had to deal with courtiers who hadn't seen a bucket of water in months. One of his doctors even recommended wine baths for health. Wine. For bathing. Not drinking. Baths, when they did happen, were a luxury and a process. Heating the water took hours. You'd sit in a big wooden tub, possibly with herbs like rosemary or sage tossed in, and maybe even someone scrubbing your back if you were rich. Poorer folks might just splash themselves with a damp cloth and call it a day. So imagine it. You're preparing for bed in your drafty wooden cottage. The fireplace glows, casting flickers of light across the beams. Your wool blanket smells like old cheese. Your feet are permanently muddy, and your hair is a bird's dream nest. You lay down, and the air itself feels heavy with centuries of grime, and yet you're perfectly at peace. Because in this world, smelling like fermented onions was just part of being alive. You wake up to the sound of roosters because, of course, alarm clocks don't exist yet, and immediately realize something. You're cold, you're itchy, and your teeth feel like they're wearing little wool sweaters. Morning breath, but make it medieval. As you sit up on your straw mattress stuffed with last year's hay, you swat away a flea. Or was that a louse? Who knows? Welcome to your medieval morning routine, where dental hygiene is a whispered rumor and pest control involves shaking your tunic really hard. Now, before you worry, yes, people did brush their teeth, sort of, but not with toothbrushes. Instead, they might chew on twigs, rub ashes or crushed herbs across their teeth, or rinse with vinegar or wine. Fancy, right? And some even plucked out tooth hairs. That's right. Medieval dental grooming included pulling rogue bristles from molars using tweezers. But don't get too excited. Most people just lived with plaque and hoped for the best. Toothaches were common, and so were rotten teeth by middle age. Dentistry involved, wait for it, pliers and prayer. You got a toothache? Time to see the village blacksmith who might yank it out using tools meant for horseshoes. Because sure, that sounds safe. Historians still argue whether medieval people suffered more dental problems than we do today. On one hand, they didn't eat refined sugar, so cavities were less common in early centuries. On the other hand, they didn't have dentists or floss or fluoride. So while your enamel was safe from Skittles, it was still at risk from, time and neglect. Back to your day. You splash your face with cold water, if you're lucky enough to have a basin. No soap, of course. Maybe you sniff a sprig of mint to freshen your breath, if you can afford herbs. Then you put on your tunic, again, and smooth down the spots that got extra wrinkly while you slept. Medieval fashion tip. If you own more than one outfit, you're basically royalty. You grab a hunk of stale bread and some cheese for breakfast. Both are hard as rocks, but your teeth are already halfway out the door anyway. Some people might dip their bread in wine or ale to soften it. Yes, drinking in the morning was normal, because water was often contaminated. You weren't a drunk, you were just hydrated. Now it's time for your chores. If you're a peasant, that means farming, mucking stalls, or spinning wool. If you're nobility, your morning might start with prayers, a walk through the gardens, or quietly judging your servants for not being born into wealth. Either way, you're sweating by 10 a.m. and you're not changing clothes. Again, that's for holidays. Here's your quirky tidbit of the day. In medieval manuscripts, monks would occasionally doodle pictures of themselves picking lice out of their robes. It was that common. You could be praying 1 minute and hunting for body bugs the next. Nothing says holy devotion like a quick flea pinch during Vespers. Now let's talk about hair. Washing it? Rare. Styling it? Absolutely. Women often braided their hair or covered it with linen veils. Men might wear their hair shoulder length or cropped short depending on status and fashion. You could use oils to tame it, or if you're lucky, rosemary water for a little scent. But mostly you just tied it up and hoped no birds moved in. By midday, your skin feels tight with dust and your armpits could singe grass. But again, this was fine. Everyone was musty. The noble lady next to you smells like roses on top of goat, and the priest smells like smoke and old books. The collective scent of the village was part of life, like weather or taxes. So you push through, knowing tonight you'll repeat it all. The itchy bed, the flea slap, the vinegar rinse. But for now, you're upright, breathing, and mostly clean by medieval standards. And that's what passes for hygiene in this world of damp walls and dirt floors. By now you're trudging through the village road, which is less a road and more a shared footpath that's part dirt, part manure, and somehow always damp. The air smells like smoke, mud, and someone's bad decision from dinner last night. Chickens scatter underfoot. A pig snorts near a cabbage cart. Somewhere, someone is yelling about turnips. You're off to fulfill your duty, because in medieval society, you have a duty. Maybe you're a blacksmith's apprentice, your hands already scarred from hot iron. Or maybe you're in training to become a knight, which mostly means getting hit with sticks and falling off horses. Either way, you are not relaxing. The hierarchy is set. If you're a peasant, you work. If you're a noble, you still work. But your chores are labeled responsibilities and you get fancier clothes while doing them. No one's sleeping in today. On your walk, you pass the local alewife. Yes, a woman who brews beer. Most beer in medieval towns is made by women, often in their homes. It's a respected, if grueling, job. And good thing too, because ale is safer to drink than water. You nod at her, and she nods back, covered in flour and hops and the faint scent of barley sweat. Let's talk about food, because you're already hungry again. Daily meals depend entirely on class and season. You're lucky if you get grain pottage, oats, onions, maybe some peas. Meat is rare unless you're nobility, and spices are exotic luxuries. Forget pepper, you'd be amazed how much salt costs. If you live near the coast, dried fish is common. Inland, it's root vegetables and bread until your body becomes 40% turnip. Sometimes you eat stale bread bowls filled with stew. You call it dinner. Today we'd call it a bread-scented rock. Here's your quirky bit. Medieval cookbooks existed, but they weren't written for average folks. They read more like spells. Take a goose, boil it thrice, then stuff it with saffron, cloves, and 12 almonds. It's less recipe and more kitchen chaos with prestige. While walking, you pass a church bell ringing. It's the midday call to prayer. People cross themselves. You follow suit because everyone is religious, whether by belief or by law. Christianity dominates life. There are saints for everything: sore throats, lost cows, annoying neighbors. And sin is serious. Think twice before stealing that onion. Historians still argue whether medieval people were genuinely more pious or simply scared of eternal damnation. But religion shaped the calendar, the economy, and even medicine. Coughing too much? Might be your humors, or maybe you angered a saint. Let's pray just in case. Back to your walk. You hear a lute playing, a minstrel's performing in the square, singing tales of great knights, dragons, and doomed love. The tune's catchy. The lyrics are not. And thus the noble maid did pine, her heart entwined like twisting vine. It rhymes, but barely. You smile, toss a pebble, and move on. You've got a meeting, or more like a training match, with your superior. If you're a knight in training, you'll spend hours sparring in armor that smells like boiled leather and old socks. It's hot, it's heavy, and it hurts. Chivalry sounds poetic until you're eating dirt. If you're lucky, you're just a squire today, polishing armor, feeding horses, holding spears. Less danger, more boredom. But you dream of glory, of joining the Crusades and earning a title. Bad news, that dream will age poorly. And yes, we're getting to the Crusades, but hold on. Today is about surviving, and that means learning, watching, adapting. You speak when spoken to. You bow when required. You carry yourself like someone who knows their place, because stepping out of line could mean a whipping, or worse. The afternoon sun beats down. You're tired. You're sore. But as you drink that lukewarm ale and munch a dried fig from your pocket, a rare treat, you remember one comforting thing. At least you're not on leech duty today. The shadows grow long as the afternoon creeps toward evening, and you, brave soul of the Middle Ages, are still not done with your day. There's still hay to be moved, armor to be repaired, or bread to knead, depending on your station in life. But let's pretend, just for tonight, that you're training to be a knight. It sounds glamorous, right? Until you realize knighthood is about 10% glory and 90% blisters. Your mentor is a grizzled man with one eye and zero patience. He swings a wooden sword like he's swatting flies, except you're the fly. You block, you trip, you fall. He laughs. You think you might cry, but then remember, knights don't cry. They grimace with dignity. Between drills, you help him repair a saddle. Leather tools squeak and groan as you tighten buckles and sew worn straps. Horseback riding is essential for any knight, but here's something they don't put on the recruitment posters. Falling off a war horse hurts a lot, and you'll do it about a dozen times before you figure out how to stay on. By the way, speaking of horses, did you know they weren't all massive beasts like in the movies? Most medieval war horses were closer to modern-day ponies in size. Agile, tough, and probably smarter than half the squires in your barracks. If your horse likes you, great. If not, sleep with one eye open. Later, a monk arrives from the nearby abbey. He's collecting donations. Grain, tools, sometimes even chickens. The church owns land, remember, and everyone pays tithes. That's 10% of your income or produce. Refusing? Not advised. He gives you a few words of Latin encouragement. You nod solemnly, having no idea what he said. You're not alone. Literacy is reserved for clergy and nobility. If you can read at all, you're already elite. The rest of the population? They rely on stories, oral traditions, and stained glass windows to make sense of scripture. Here's your scholarly tidbit. Historians still argue whether literacy rates were rising faster in towns versus rural areas by the late 14th century, or whether it was mostly a clerical monopoly until the printing press turned the tide. Back to your chores. You're sent to the smithy where the blacksmith, shirtless, sweaty, soot-covered, bangs out horseshoes with terrifying ease. He hands you a blunt dagger and tells you to sharpen it. You try. Sparks fly. You nearly take off your eyebrow. He chuckles like all seasoned artisans who've seen 100 ewes come and go. Dinner nears, and the manor's great hall fills with smells. You're invited to eat with the household tonight, a rare privilege. The table is long and candles flicker against stone walls. Trenchers, stale bread plates are handed out, then topped with meat stew, mostly gristle, a hint of carrot. It's delicious. Or you're just that hungry. Here comes your quirky detail. Forks aren't really used yet. You eat with a knife and fingers. Proper manners mean not licking the knife too obviously. And if you're noble, you wipe your fingers on the tablecloth because, why not? Luxury. A minstrel starts playing again, this time singing about King Arthur. Everyone listens. Tales of Camelot are wildly popular, even though they're mostly made up. That's fine. Heroes make hardship bearable. And in a world where disease and war lurk in every corner, stories are the best kind of armor. The knight across from you belches, loudly. Everyone applauds. Etiquette is different here. As the fire dies down, the steward calls lights out. Servants scurry to clean up. You help stack dishes and carry water. It's not glamorous, but it keeps you from getting in trouble. On your way back to the barracks, you pass the local healer's hut. Inside, herbs hang from the ceiling and jars filled with strange things glow in the firelight. Poppy syrup, crushed beetles, powdered unicorn horn. Spoiler, it's not unicorn. You hear someone coughing inside, they're being bled. Yep, still a thing. You wonder if you'll survive long enough to be knighted. Honestly, chances are 50-50. Between dysentery, infected blisters, and the occasional peasant rebellion, it's a miracle anyone reaches adulthood. But tonight, you're still here, still sore, still breathing. And that's something. Dawn hasn't broken yet, but you're already awake, shivering, sore, and mildly annoyed that the rooster apparently took the day off. It's your stomach that wakes you, really. You fell asleep dreaming of roast duck, only to be jolted into reality by the rumble of, well, your own internal rebellion. Welcome to another fine morning in medieval life. You roll off your straw mattress, brushing away a few stray bugs, and tug on your coarse woolen tunic. It's itchy, but it's what you've got. If you're lucky, you might get a second shirt this year. If you're really lucky, it won't already be someone else's hand-me-down. Out in the yard, dew clings to everything. The air smells of wet dirt, horse sweat, and breakfast porridge. If you're fortunate enough to be anywhere near a kitchen. You're not. Your first task is mucking out the stables. Yes, before food. Because priorities. You shovel manure while the horses eye you like they know something you don't. One sneezes on your arm. You sigh. Just another morning in paradise. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Knights weren't always rich, and most didn't own the land they fought for. Many were vassals, serving a lord in exchange for gear, food, and the hope of future land grants. The glamorous castle-owning knights you imagine? A small percentage. Most were more like heavily armed interns. You sneak a bite of old bread between chores. Hard as a rock, but at least it's food. Maybe you chase it with a swig of watered-down ale. That's right, ale for breakfast. Water is dangerous, riddled with bacteria unless boiled or blessed. So children, monks, even nuns drink weak beer. Congratulations, you're buzzed before breakfast. By mid-morning, it's time for weapons training again. Wooden swords today, because real ones are expensive and your nose is still crooked from the last accident. You spar with another squire, both of you trying to act like you know what you're doing. You don't. You both whiff repeatedly until your mentor yells that your footwork resembles a drunk goose. Somewhere across the yard, a nobleman's daughter watches the chaos with mild amusement. You pretend not to notice. She pretends you don't exist. So that's going well. Here's a quirky tidbit. Knights hated helmets early on. Why? No peripheral vision, terrible hearing, and the heat inside could cook an egg. Many preferred open-face helms unless in actual battle. But if your lord insists, on it goes, and you just hope you don't throw up inside it. After a short break, you're sent to the castle's outer wall to help repair the wooden palisade. You hammer crooked nails while fending off bees. Your gloves are worn thin. Splinters become inevitable. You daydream of being anywhere else, maybe a spice merchant in Venice or a pirate. Pirates don't have to muck stables, right? But then someone mentions the Crusades. Ah, yes. The Holy Wars. And as a young squire, you're expected to dream of riding east, sword in hand, reclaiming Jerusalem for glory and God. Sounds noble, right? But here's what they don't tell you. Crusading is expensive. You'd have to pawn everything you own and maybe borrow more. And if you survive the journey, which is not likely, you'll face heat, disease, and unfamiliar food. Spoiler, you'll get dysentery from the hummus. Scholars still argue whether the Crusades were primarily religious quests or strategic land grabs by bored nobles. Either way, being cannon fodder in chainmail isn't as thrilling as the tapestries make it look. Back in the yard, a messenger arrives on horseback, dusty, pale, and shaking. He brings news of plague in a neighboring village. Everyone stiffens. You suddenly remember that weird cough you heard last night. Great. The steward announces that the gates will be closed for 3 days. Trade is suspended. No visitors. No exceptions. This is your first taste of medieval quarantine. Primitive, but surprisingly effective. Maybe they didn't know the word bacteria, but they knew enough too. But they knew enough to isolate sick folks. That doesn't stop everyone from panicking. Later, you help the cook stir stew. He tells you about the time a knight got food poisoning the night before battle and tried to joust from a chamber pot. You laugh, hard, then wonder if you'll end up a story like that one day. As dusk settles, you climb onto the castle's outer rampart and gaze across the misty fields. For a moment, it's peaceful, quiet. Then you hear shouting in the courtyard. A goat has escaped and is eating the laundry. Of course it is. You rush down to help corral it. Geoffrey, the siege goat, dodges 3 squires, 2 maids, and 1 very angry laundress. Eventually, he climbs onto a stone column and lounges like he owns the place. And maybe he does. Honestly, it's his world. We're just living in it. Evening has fallen, and with it comes a peculiar stillness. You wipe sweat and goat fur from your face as the sun dips behind the hills, painting the sky with streaks of copper and rose. A bell tolls somewhere in the castle, not for prayer this time, but for the evening meal. Or as you've come to think of it, whatever's left in the cauldron. You drag yourself to the hall, feet sore and arms tired from a day of glorified labor. The scent hits you before you enter. Stew again, with too much barley and not enough meat. Still, it's warm, and tonight that's enough. You find your place on a long wooden bench. The other squires are already gossiping. Someone dropped a sword in the well. Someone else swears they saw a ghost in the grain cellar. You nod, half listening, spooning the lukewarm mash into your mouth. The stew tastes faintly of onions and vaguely of despair. Mainstream historical fact incoming. Despite Hollywood's love affair with grand feast scenes, most medieval folks and even nobility had simple, repetitive diets. Grains, pottage, salted fish if lucky. Spices were precious and rare, and meat was a luxury. For a squire like you, boiled barley 3 days in a row isn't a disaster. It's routine. Tonight, a traveling monk joins the table, fresh from the abbey. He carries a small leather pouch and a 1,000-yard stare. Everyone wants to know what news he brings, but he only mutters something about visions of fire and frogs, which could either mean a biblical prophecy or that someone's been nibbling wild mushrooms again. You decide not to ask. You finish your meal, grateful you still have teeth to chew with. Oral hygiene in medieval times? Let's just say, if your teeth start falling out, nobody's surprised. No toothbrushes, no floss. Maybe a twig with frayed ends, and some mint leaves if you're fancy. You've heard horror stories of barbers pulling molars with iron tongs and no anesthetic. Toothaches aren't just painful here. They're dangerous. As you step out into the cool air, the castle feels different. Still. The kind of still that prickles at the back of your neck. You're on chamber duty tonight, which means guarding the Lord's solar, his private quarters. Not glamorous, but it beats stable shoveling. You strap on your practice sword and take your post outside a heavy wooden door. Inside, you hear murmurs. The Lord is speaking with a guest. Something about border disputes, a possible siege. You don't understand all the politics, but you recognize the tension in their voices. Something's brewing. Your candle flickers in the wind and your mind wanders. You think about your parents, farmers who saved every coin to send you here. You think about your old dog, who used to follow you into the fields. And you think about that noble girl again, the one who hasn't looked your way once, but who still invades your dreams like an invading army. Here's your quirky fact. In some medieval courts, people believed that lovesickness was an actual medical condition. Symptoms included sighing, insomnia, and writing bad poetry. If it got bad enough, they might send you to a monastery to cool off. You wonder if you're halfway there already. A bell rings again, this time Compline, the final prayer service of the day. Monks and devout nobles head to the chapel, whispering verses. You remain at your post, listening to the echo of sandals on stone. Behind you, the door creaks open. The guest leaves, tall, hooded, silent. He nods at you. You nod back, trying to look alert. Inside, the Lord calls for wine. You fetch it from the cellar, navigating the dark spiral stairs and the cold, musty air. You hate the cellar. It smells like wet stone and old secrets. Scholars still argue whether medieval castles were mostly defensive strongholds or symbols of wealth and power. From your spot in the wine-slick cellar, it definitely feels more like an uncomfortable concrete bunker. You grab a jug and climb back up, knees aching. By the time your shift ends, the stars are out. The sky here is clear. No light pollution. No smoke from factories. Just pure celestial silence. You lie on your straw mattress again, hoping sleep comes quickly. It doesn't. You toss and turn, itchy, thinking about everything and nothing. You picture battle, a fantasy where you save the kingdom and win impossible praise. Then you picture real battle, mud, noise, screaming men, your friends dying. That image sticks. Outside your tiny window, an owl hoots. You count the hoots like sheep. 1, 2, 3. A voice breaks the silence, a bard singing softly in the great hall. You can't make out the words, but the melody is sad and slow. Something about a knight who never returned. You close your eyes and let the song carry you away. Maybe tomorrow will be better. You wake up sore and half frozen, straw sticking to your cheek like nature's cruel joke. The sun hasn't fully risen yet, but the cock has crowed, and that bird never lies. You're up before your body is ready, your legs stiff, your back groaning like you're 80 and not, well, whatever age you are now. To be honest, you've kind of lost track. Today is weapons training, again, because apparently swinging a wooden sword at a straw dummy builds character. You force down some rye bread and cheese that smells like it's already fought its own battle and lost. The kitchen maid gives you a look that says, "That's the freshest thing you're getting, so chew it or starve." Out in the practice yard, the master-at-arms waits. He's built like an ox and smells worse. He greets you with a nod and a whack across the shoulders. "Today," he grunts, "we teach you how not to die." Motivating. He tosses you a blunted sword, heavier than it looks. Your palms sting just gripping the handle. The first few swings are awkward and weak. You're trying to look confident, but the sword has other plans, mostly involving gravity and your lack of coordination. Mainstream historical fact time. Knights didn't just wake up awesome with a sword. It took years of grueling training to even hold your own in battle. And while chivalry is romantic in stories, in reality, it meant you were expected to kill with grace and die without complaint. Comforting. A few drills later, you're dripping sweat, the tunic clinging to your back. Your arms feel like overcooked noodles. The master-at-arms snorts. You'd last 2 seconds in a skirmish. You offer him a weak smile and think about crying. Then it's sparring time. You square up against another squire, Gervais. Smug, fast, and incredibly punchable. He bows dramatically. You bow awkwardly. Then he lunges. You manage to block once, twice. Then he fakes left and lands a hit on your thigh. You drop like a sack of grain. As you lie there gasping, staring at a sky that doesn't care, someone shouts, "He's dead." You're not, just humiliated. Eventually, you crawl off the field, your pride bruised more than anything else. You slump against a barrel, gulping water like it's holy. Gervais walks by and offers you a half smile. "Good form," he says. You're not sure if he's joking. You grunt something vaguely threatening in return. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Medieval combat manuals, real ones, actually included wrestling techniques including biting and eye gouging. It wasn't all elegant swordplay. Sometimes it was rip his arm off and hit him with it. Kind of makes Gervais's jab seem tame. Your break is short-lived. A horn sounds. The lord is hosting visiting nobles, and squires are needed to help with the falconry display. You stifle a groan and run, or limp briskly, to the mews, where noble birds glare at you like feathery snobs. You spend the next hour wrangling angry hawks. One of them pecks your ear. You're bleeding, but at least it's not your sword hand. Finally, the falconer takes over, and you retreat to the shade. There, you overhear something interesting. The lord's daughter is going to be married off to some southern duke. She's barely 14. You blink. It's not surprising, but it still makes your stomach churn. Historians still argue whether noble women had any say in their marriages. In theory, they could refuse. In practice, not so much. Marriage was about alliances and land, not love or choice. Romantic, isn't it? By late afternoon, you're reassigned again, this time to escort a merchant caravan to the village. You carry a halberd that's more for show than safety. The roads are dusty, the villagers curious. One of them, a tanner's daughter, smiles at you. A real smile, not the polished kind you see at court. Your heart does a little somersault. Then she's gone, swallowed by the crowd. On the way back, one of the merchants tells you stories about distant lands, spices that burn the tongue. On the way back, one of the merchants tells you stories about distant lands, spices that burn the tongue, cities where the buildings touch the sky. You try to imagine it all. It feels like dreaming with your eyes open. As dusk falls, the castle gates loom ahead. You're exhausted, but there's something comforting about the routine. You've survived another day. Barely. You pass the well where the sword was dropped yesterday. Someone tied a rope to a bucket to fish it out. The sword's still down there. You're tempted to jump in and join it. Instead, you head to the stables, check on the horses, and brush down a particularly stubborn one named Mildew. She nips your tunic, but you forgive her. Then it's back to the hall for dinner, another barley stew. Someone plays a lute. The tune is cheerful but off-key. You let yourself enjoy it anyway. Later, lying on your itchy mattress, your muscles ache in that oddly satisfying way. Like you earned the pain. You think about that tanner's daughter again and the far-off cities and the hawk who stole your dignity, and you realize you're changing, slowly, painfully, but you are. Sleep takes its time, but it comes. You dream of battle, not the glorious kind sung by bards, No, your dreams are a jumble of clashing metal, screaming horses, and your own voice shouting something. When you jolt awake, heart hammering, it takes a moment to realize you're still safe inside the castle walls. Just another night of medieval stress dreams. Charming. Today begins with a bang, literally. A kitchen pot has exploded over the fire. You hear the scullion wailing about burnt stew and someone swearing about a lost breakfast. So you make do with a chunk of bread and a mug of warm, cloudy ale. Yes, ale. Water isn't exactly safe. You've accepted that getting a little tipsy before sword drills is just part of the lifestyle now. You've barely finished eating when a trumpet sounds. Visitors. Important ones. That means cleanup, armor polishing, and behaving like you haven't just stepped in pig droppings, which you have. You and the other squires are lined up in the courtyard, desperately trying to look presentable. One of the knights mutters, "Look sharp, we need to impress." You consider asking what happens if you don't, but decide against it. The guests arrive, high-ranking nobles with plumes so large they could double as parasols and cloaks heavier than your dignity. They barely glance at you. Still, you're told to hold their horses, literally, for 2 hours. One of them chews on your sleeve. While you're standing there like a glorified hitching post, a nearby knight launches into a story about his time in the Crusades. You listen in. Here's your mainstream historical fact. While the Crusades are often painted as grand religious missions, many knights joined for less than noble reasons. Wealth, land, titles, or simply the thrill of sanctioned violence. Some were deeply pious, others just wanted to loot and not get in trouble for it. Very inspiring. The knight describes sandstorms, starvation, and a time he drank camel blood to stay alive. You try not to gag. The nobleman next to him laughs like it's a joke. You're not convinced. A servant drops a tray, and the clang echoes through the courtyard. Everyone flinches. The noblewoman at the center of attention waves a hand. "Let's tour the stables," she announces, as if that's not where the horses poop. Of course, you're summoned to lead the tour. You rattle off facts about breeds and feeding times, trying not to mix up stallion and gelding again after last time's unfortunate misunderstanding. The noblewoman barely listens. She's more interested in the tapestry hanging near the stable door. It shows St. George slaying a dragon. Bold colors, triumphant pose. You feel like the dragon. Later, while mucking out the stalls, yes, you still have to do that, you think about that knight's story, and the way his hands shook just a little when he talked about the siege. Nobody else noticed. You did. Quirky tidbit incoming. During the Crusades, some knights reportedly sewed parchment prayers into their armor linings for protection. Others carried teeth of saints or bottles of holy sand. Protection came in many forms, some divine, some creatively superstitious. Afternoon brings combat drills again, this time formation work. You're learning to fight as a unit, which means trusting the guy next to you not to accidentally take your ear off. He almost does, twice. Your arms ache, your thighs burn. You smell like horse sweat and despair. The sun feels like it's trying to melt your eyes out. Someone throws up behind you. Historians still argue whether knights in these battle lines were actually as disciplined as the manuals suggest. Some sources say it was chaos once combat began. Shields up, yes, but after the first clash it was every man for himself, dodging sword swings and trying not to trip over corpses. You believe it. Training formations with these guys feels like rehearsing ballet with a pack of drunk bears. Eventually, mercifully, you're dismissed. You gulp water until your stomach sloshes. You think about that tapestry again, the dragon dying, St. George standing victorious. What does no one ever draw? The part where his squire probably had to clean the blood off that armor later. That night, you're sent to help in the armory. Rows of swords, axes, maces, and suits of armor await polishing. You pick up a helmet. It's heavy, dents marring the once smooth surface. You imagine the story behind each dent. You're joined by the blacksmith's apprentice, a girl named Bruna. She's smart, sarcastic, and frighteningly good with a whetstone. You trade stories. Well, mostly she mocks you and you take it because her hammer is bigger than yours. Still, it's nice. She makes you laugh, and that feels like a rare commodity around here. As you work, she asks, "You really want to be a knight?" You hesitate. You used to say yes immediately. Now, you're not so sure. The armor clinks around you like a chorus of ghosts. When you finally crawl into bed, sore and bruised and wondering if you'll ever have full use of your left shoulder again, you close your eyes and whisper a quick prayer. Not for glory, just for a morning where no one yells at you before sunrise. You wake to the sound of shouting. Again. This time it's not the cook or a sparring mishap, it's a messenger. He's ridden in from the south, horse foaming and eyes wild. The entire keep seems to hold its breath as he delivers the news to the lord of the castle. You're close enough to catch a few words. Uprising, borderlands, reinforcements needed. You already know what this means for you. Within the hour, the courtyard erupts into action. Squires racing to saddle horses, knights shouting orders, and servants preparing rations for the road. You're handed your travel gear without ceremony. A worn cloak, dried meat that tastes like regret, and a dagger you're told to sharpen just in case. Today, you ride. Your mount isn't the noble white steed of stories. She's stubborn, spotted, and bites if you try to touch her ears. You respect that. You name her Gertrude. She ignores you completely. The column forms slowly, 20 knights, a dozen squires, and a few retainers. No banners flutter, no trumpets blare. This isn't a parade. It's logistics, nerves, and the sound of leather creaking under chainmail. As you ride, the landscape changes, forests thinning, hills rolling wider. You pass peasants who bow low but avoid eye contact. Some children wave. You wave back. One throws a rock. Mainstream historical fact break. Despite the glorified image, most knights spent more time traveling, waiting, or enforcing law, often cruelly, than actually fighting in battles. Real combat was relatively rare, but when it came, it was chaos. The knight riding beside you tells a story about another rebellion years ago. He laughs as he recalls setting fire to a mill just to send a message. You nod weakly and focus on not being sick in your helmet. The road is long. The saddle begins to feel like an instrument of torture. You shift every 10 minutes trying to stop your legs from going numb. It doesn't help. Someone starts singing a marching song. You learn to hate that song within 3 verses. You reach a village by dusk, one barely more than a handful of huts and a chapel. There's a tense energy as your party stops for the night. The lord insists on quartering in the largest house. You're assigned the barn. Gertrude farts aggressively and seems pleased about it. As night falls, you're assigned watch duty. You sit in the cold, dagger on your lap, listening to the rustling trees and trying to stay awake. Every sound feels amplified. An owl hoots and nearly makes you jump out of your boots. You rehearse lines in your head. No, sir. I did not abandon my post. Yes, sir. I did scream like a girl, but only briefly. Quirky tidbit for your mental file. Some knights believed that sleeping in their armor kept them battle-ready. What it actually kept them was chafed, sweaty, and at high risk of fungal infections. The romance really dies at the foot fungus, doesn't it? You doze off slightly, only for a moment, and wake with a start to Bruna tossing a chunk of bread at you. Your snoring was attracting wolves, she mutters. You're not sure if she's joking. The fire crackles low, casting strange shadows across her face. She looks over the fields and says softly, "You think this will ever end?" You shrug. You don't know if she means the riding, the training, the endless petty wars, or just the bone-deep exhaustion that seems to follow you now. Historians still argue whether these regional skirmishes were truly driven by ideology, or were simply power plays cloaked in faith and nobility. Looking around, you feel like you know the answer. This isn't a holy mission. It's territory. It's fear. It's someone else's ambition costing you sleep and sanity. When you're finally relieved from watch, you return to the barn and try to sleep on a pile of straw that smells like wet dog and despair. You dream of your old village again. This time the fields are on fire. You wake before dawn, throat dry, muscles tight. You don't know how long You wake before dawn, throat dry, muscles tight. You don't know how long this campaign will last. You don't even know where you're going exactly, just that you'll keep riding until someone tells you to stop, or until the horse collapses. You chew on stale bread, strap on your armor, and check Gertrude's tack. She tries to kick you. You try not to take it personally. You ride into fog. Thick, clinging mist rolls over the hills like a ghost army. The sky is the color of unwashed wool, and the silence presses in like wet linen. Even the birds seem to be holding their breath. Your fellow riders grow quiet. The mood shifts. You'd chalk it up to weather, but deep down you know, this is the edge of something. Scouts go ahead, disappearing into the gray. The rest of you move cautiously, eyes scanning every tree, every bush. Even Gertrude seems more serious today. Her ears twitch, her hooves clip softer on the muddy path. Suddenly the column halts, word travels back, bodies ahead. You dismount and walk forward. The scene isn't pretty. 2 men, farmers maybe, lie sprawled across the road, their faces twisted in a final moment of pain. Their cart is overturned, contents looted. The tracks around them tell a story. Hoofprints, dozens of them, leading off into the woods. You've never seen a dead body before. It smells like iron and fear. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval banditry was a real and constant threat, especially during times of unrest. Traveling even a few miles could mean risking your life. Knights were often deployed not to fight noble wars but to keep roads safe, although what safe meant varied widely depending on your lord's morals. Your captain gives orders: flank the path, keep swords drawn, you follow, heart pounding, wishing you'd sharpened that dagger a bit more last night. The woods are tight and gnarled. Branches catch at your cloak like grasping hands. You hear things, twigs snapping, crows overhead, something breathing just out of sight. Suddenly, chaos. A shout. An arrow whistles past your ear. Screams explode from the trees. You don't think, you just run. Toward the sound or away from it, you're not even sure. Your training kicks in, shield up, blade ready. You catch a glimpse of your attacker. A man in tattered leather, face wrapped in cloth, eyes wild. You parry his first strike. The second misses. The third catches your shoulder. Pain lights up your brain like a church bell ringing in your skull. And then, Bruna. She charges in, slamming the bandit with her shield, knocking him flat. Blood sprays. The sound is wet and awful. He doesn't get up. You both stand there panting, covered in grime, and something else you don't want to name. Quirky tidbit. Despite modern assumptions, medieval women sometimes trained for and participated in combat, especially in defensive roles. Some noble ladies even led sieges or commanded garrisons. Bruna, it seems, is keeping that tradition alive. The skirmish lasts minutes, maybe seconds. Time distorts. When it's over, your group regathers. A few are injured. One is missing. The fog lifts slightly as you burn the bandits' bodies. Not for honor, but to prevent disease. Historians still argue whether such small-scale attacks were signs of wider rebellion or merely desperate acts of survival by peasants squeezed between taxes and famine. Seeing the hunger in those eyes before they died, you suspect the truth is messier than any textbook will admit. That night there's no inn, no barn, just a patch of half-frozen earth and a sky full of unfamiliar stars. You lie beside the fire, your arm bandaged, your head spinning. Bruna tosses you a strip of dried venison. Eat. Cry later. You don't laugh, but you smile. A little. Your fingers trace the dent in your shield. You're not sure if you're brave or just still alive. The fire crackles, the horses grunt softly nearby, and someone begins to snore. And despite everything, despite the death, the blood, the awful taste of fear still in your mouth, you sleep. You wake to birdsong. Not trumpets, not the clang of armor, just birdsong. And somehow it's more powerful, more sacred. Your body aches. Your shoulder pulses with each heartbeat, a dull reminder of how close it came. The fire's embers glow faintly, like a dying constellation on the forest floor. Around you, the others stir. No speeches, no prayers. Just groans, stretching, and Bruna muttering about how medieval boots were clearly designed by a sadist. You rise slowly. Every part of you wants to lie back down, to melt into the moss, to let the earth swallow you whole and dream of things that don't involve swords or screams. But you rise anyway, Because that's what nights do, right? Back on the road, the fog has cleared. The sun peeks through the trees, making everything look deceptively gentle. Birds flit between branches. A squirrel scolds you from above as if your passage offends its morning routine. And then, ahead, your destination, a castle, not the fairy tale kind. This one is squat, square, a bruise of gray stone on the horizon. A fortress, not a palace. No towers for princesses, just walls. Tall, grim, unwelcoming. But you've made it. Your captain barks orders. Squires are sent ahead to announce your arrival. The rest of you fall into formation, brushing dirt from tunics, trying to look more like warriors and less like weary ghosts. As the gate creaks open, you remember something. A story told in whispers back in the village. That inside these walls lives a nobleman who hasn't left his solar in 3 years. Some say he drinks ink instead of wine. Others claim he once tried to baptize a chicken. Quirky? Sure. But you've come to expect nothing less. Mainstream fact: medieval nobles were often more isolated than glorified. Surrounded by sycophants and plagued by paranoia, some descended into eccentricity or madness. Power, after all, doesn't guarantee peace of mind. Inside, you're met with polite confusion. You're not the army they expected. Just a few bruised knights and a goat. Oh, right. Geoffrey. Somehow, through all of it, Geoffrey the siege goat has not only survived, but thrived. He's lounging in the courtyard now, atop a broken column like a Roman emperor, chewing something that might have once been a tabard. And somehow, that's enough for now. Historians still argue whether the Crusades achieved anything meaningful in the long run, beyond bloodshed, plague routes, and a treasure trove of misunderstood relics. But tonight, that debate doesn't matter, because you're here, breathing, alive. You sit beside Geoffrey, who snorts and shifts just enough to share his sunbeam, and you think, not of glory or honor or what tomorrow brings, but of the bird song this morning, the heat of a fire, Bruna's dry humor, the weight of a sword in your hand, and the lightness that comes when you set it down. You think, maybe that's the real history, and maybe it's enough.